deeply from the perspective of the benchmarking, or how do we set the bar for the secured lending? I mean, traditionally, if you see the unsecured, doing the benchmarking of unsecured lending would be far different from the secured lending, because the journeys and overall perspective of the customer experience is pretty different here. So we'll try to dig deep into it and share my understanding with you, and happy to hear your feedback. And if you have any questions, we'll be able to pick up during the journey. Looking at the customer experience perspective, so it has become very critical differentiator out there. I mean, be it from the perspective of, say, simplistic payments, or be it the journeys which are related to, say, lending from the perspective of the personal lending, or the simplistic journeys which have been there in the market. The overall experience or adoption of digitization have changed the whole perspective of all the journeys. So even the consumer behavior which is there, that has got changed. I mean, initially there could have been a situation where you would be waiting for the response to come for any of the activity which you are doing on the screen, etc. But looking at the today's scenario, not just about the payments, but even about the products like BNPL are pretty fast, where during the journey itself, you are able to take the loan and move forward. So these are simplified in multiple ways. Also, the landscape is very competitive, since digitization is almost all over and everybody is trying to adapt it. It's like last wants to become first, and first wants to stay as a first. So it has become very competitive landscape. Also, the availability perspective, it is available from all the perspective of the being partnership with the fintechs, or being the options available from the neobanks or any other traditional partners. So that has become a very competitive landscape as such. So from the benchmarking perspective, how it is improvised from the digital perspective or from the journey perspective. So largely, the benchmarking is around setting the proper parameters, performance parameters which are there. What are the current practices which have been followed, the current journeys, and the digital strategy, because it has to be aligned to the digital strategy as well. And largely, if you see the how does it benefits, or why it is required, if you want to call out from that perspective. So it does help from the identification of performance gaps, because many of the times it happens that the journeys what are been designed are from the perspective of the product which is there, and not been frequently revisited from the market perspective. So there the benchmarking helps a lot, that how the performance gaps can be improved. Many of the times what happens that we build the journeys, but the customer or the target segment which is there, that has got changed, or their expectations have got changed. So to assess that, the benchmarking again becomes one of the medium where you can do that. Also, simply adding to it is like, what are the best practices which are available in the market and what are being followed, is where it is again helpful to have benchmarking. Um, Definitely, it helps on operational side, because many of the times it happens that we may not have the understanding or visibility from the perspective that what is happening into the you can say the other organizations from that perspective, like how what are the new operational paradigms that have been set up, which have simplified the traditional journeys or traditional experiences. Many of the times it happens that the still the contracts have been done on the paper. I mean, people have to sign, they have to visit multiple times. Whereas if you see, there has been option for the e-sign which has come up, which is largely been adopted. So such kind of operational, improving operational efficiencies there, it helps from the perspective of maybe the KYC perspective, adding people to the KYC. Doing the KYC was been very difficult if you see, if you keep video KYC out of it. Now, to simplify that, video KYC can be one of the option. So that will be, you can centralize multiple operations as single place, which will also help on, reducing the cost as well as improving the overall efficiency of the operations team from that perspective. And definitely the competition is still there. I mean, as we were discussing earlier as well, the space has become so composite that there is high competition which is out there. So many of the times it happens that the typically the who are the first on sort of the first movers typically pick up this journey. But what we have observed is like they are still want to look after the market to see that whether something new has come up into the market. I mean, not just from the India perspective, but even outside India. Although I mean, we do have a pretty better situation in India from the adoption of digital perspective. But the message I just wanted to convey is like have been seeing the many of the I mean top digitally adopted institutions which are still talking about how can we make it more better for the customers, for the employees, and for overall product experience perspective. And definitely it helps for the customer engagement as well, because once you have the better customer engagement or the better journeys, better experiences, a customer is typically would stay with you and would come back to you for any related services or to avail any of the services. So looking at that, so benchmarking does help from that perspective, from the digitization of the journeys, as well as from overall perspective. So how do we identify that we need to do the benchmarking? I mean, we spoke about what are the benefits that it will give and how it can be done. That we'll talk about. But now, when can we say that we need to do the benchmarking, or we need to look outside the current current bracket to see what is happening in the market? So from the perspective of the customer experience, so I mean, there is if there are any customer support volume is higher, we need to have a lot of customer issues which are coming in, or the customer reviews are not that good, the customer churn is higher. I mean, the examples which we were talking about while Samir was mentioning, I mean, in that case, if the customer feedback has been taken, the feedback would definitely not be good. So that would be one of the example. And many of the times it happens that the customer teaches you much more than others, because they do experience the different journeys from the different organizations. And typically now, if you say in today's date, it's largely I mean the trend which is happening largely out there, where if the service is not good, typically customer will switch it immediately to the another provider. So in that way, the customer feedback becomes very prominent, and there you easily see, you can see that there are some comments which are coming in the forums as well, where they mention that the your journey is not that good, and we were able to execute XYZ journey with XYZ company in say less than 2 minutes, 3 minutes, etc. From that perspective. So that calls out the customer issues is one of the parameter where we need to look at internal efficiencies, inefficiencies perspective, like the operations are being siloed. Likewise, there are different regions which are operating on the same product, but each region typically have different processes which are being followed, because there are no particular process which has been laid down, and no market practice have been seen. Because largely what we understood is like many of the times it happens that the these processes are been designed from the perspective of the, or journeys are been designed from the perspective of the one segment and one customer area. So many of the times it has been considered from the rural area, sometimes it is urban area from that perspective. But the processes which have been designed, those are common across all. So how do we adjust the operations from that perspective? So that will be one of the parameter need to look at. The operation cost is higher. Typically, what happens when you do the benchmarking, you will be able to understand that how the operations also have been handled at some level from the perspective of how the market trend is currently going on, and how they have adopted this to optimize the operational cost. Of course, the turnaround time becomes a very important factor, because if you have good journeys, definitely the turnaround time would be lesser, and lesser the turnaround time is more customer satisfaction. Because as Samir was saying, I mean, typically this time period which he was quoting was definitely the higher than anybody would expect in any of the secured lending journey. So that way it will be one of the factor to understand from the market that whether our turnaround time is same, or whether is it lesser than what is currently going into the market. So that would be one of the way to identify the benchmarking needs to be done. Also, the data-driven decision making, if that is not available, likewise, you do have good journeys, you do have a better optimization of the operations or TAT from that perspective. But the data which is being captured from the customer is not been reused. Likewise, so I mean, largely, if you see, if the customer is a ETB customer, and if the property is in terms of the say home loans perspective, if customer is existing as well as the property is approved property, it shouldn't have been much challenge for doing any execution of the loan or the approval of the loan at least. But the thing is, like, how do we optimize that data? How do we use that data? And what are the data-driven decisions we are taking is something which also followed as a part of benchmarking result perspective. Also, I mean, not the least point that is from the competitor upgrades, because typically these are the similar, I mean, operations or the similar journeys have been followed all over. So, I mean, you need to have to be there from the perspective of the market, that what are the current trends going on, how the currently customer is experiences these journeys, because as I mentioned earlier as well, right? Typically, this customer are the face of your services. So they the you can say the feedback which they give online or offline does matter. So need to have how the competitors are doing and how can we do better. What are the new innovation factor we can bring in, which will give you the better benchmarking of your current journeys. That is something will be helpful from that perspective. So this science you need to keep checking upon. I mean, this is not for the ones who are new to the digital. So these are valid for the them also who are already adopted the digitization in some or other way, or trying to look at to absorb it from the perspective of the simplifying the journeys of the secured lending products. So, if you see largely the digital part in the journeys is like the impact of it would be from the medium, and what are the what would be the major focus area during the process enhancement which have been followed is like accessibility issues for rural areas. The way we were talking about earlier as well, that for the particular areas, how is it been operating from that perspective? UI UX related challenges which are there. So how you have handled the journeys, how you have handled the UI UX of for that particular customer interfaces, or even for the internal interfaces as well. So many of the times it happens that the you have designed the journeys and designed the processes, but this is from the perspective is like one size is fitting all. So that approach may not work at all the times. Rather, at any point of time, that approach may not work. From the perspective of the trust and security concerns, that what are the security concerns are there, and any trust concerns which are there. I mean, from the perspective of adding the journeys, or from the perspective of looking at the digital perspective, the digital security also does matter on from that perspective. Also, some of the times the document collections are the redundant document collection. I mean, many of the documents which have been taken from the customer, which are repeated ones. I mean, first set of document will be collecting as a part of the process or as a part of the form application form perspective, and second time somebody else will come and ask for the same document again. So these are the typical ways this part are being considered as a part of enhancement to optimize that how many documents and how many times you're taking those documents from the customer, and are there any alternate ways to identify whether from where these documents can be picked up, so that customer experience would be better and lesser time on the operations would be spent from that perspective. Also, the loan stages which have been there from the journey perspective, so be it onboarding, be it getting the customer onto the platform, doing KYC, AML, FRM checks, and then after putting it into the initial criteria of the underwriting, and then doing the underwriting, taking a lot many documents from the customer is something which needs to be picked up from there. And definitely the misalignment between the stakeholders, like many of the times it happens that the different stakeholders which are there into the process may not be able to connect to each other. I mean, as we were saying in earlier example as well, the when operations are siloed, these problems are bound to come from that perspective. So these are the typical areas which are from the digitization perspective, which are enter into, and those are been considered or those are been looked into. And the impact perspective, when you consider these areas for the process enhancement, the impact of it would be the a medium impact would be there. But in terms of say unsecured lending, I would say this would be largely the parameters we would look into. But from the perspective of the secured lending, this does get changed from that perspective, because there is a one factor which is outside this all paradigm is the manual and physical part of it. So many of the sections of the journeys are yet to be optimized or yet to be digitized. So there are largely multiple dependencies which are there. So be it from the perspective of the availability of the technology or infrastructure, or be it from the support of the customers, etc. From that perspective, so that needs to be looked at. Typically, when you talk about the manual and digital part, the one thing to few things which would like to call out what needs to be see, or what needs to be given focus on, like the documentation process. If it is a lengthy document process, then definitely it wouldn't be helping to anyone. I mean, the limited access to information or not having the transparency of the information does also gives an impact from that perspective. Also, manual verification has typically seen to have some delays from the perspective dependency of multiple parameters, visits to the customers, etc. From that perspective, the availability of the customer. So these are also the part which needs to be considered. And dependency on the staff definitely is there, because the large part of it is either physical or been handled completely manual. So I mean, there typically these parts are considered to be unattended, or being the more far away from the digitization as of now. So the process flows are also sometimes disjointed. So likewise, you have completed the first part of initial underwriting from that perspective, and customer has been assigned for the sanction limit for his say any of the secured loan. Say taking in customer example of MSME. For MSME, the initial verification has been done, field visit has been done, and the loan sanction limit has been assigned to the customer. From there to picking that to the next step is something again would be disjoint, because the customer would have no communication about that. Nobody would be reaching out to him. Then customer will be struggling to reach out to the bank staff to check that how do we I mean continue the next part of the process, etc. From that perspective as well, this needs to be have a more attention towards it. Digitization perspective, I do not talk much about it because already we have covered it. But the one part is like the digital adoption is partial, and some of the time, what happens is when it is partial, the journeys are seen to be broken, because the expectation is like XYZ process. If it is digitized, it will be completed fully, and this is a digitized process, so may not have a dependency on the manual process or the physical part of it. But it's not a fact. I mean, in fact, the journeys, when you design partially digital journeys, you need to take care of a lot of drop-offs which are happening, because the quite possibility that the particular process will not have the continuation process from the perspective of the manual journey or the physical journey, and customer might have a drop-off from there. Communication, as I was saying, largely the how many times you touch the customer after each of the step, or after each of the process. How do you communicate with the customer? How do you keep him engaged to look for the what are the next steps which are going to come, or what are the next things that needs to be picked up by him? And definitely the digital divide issues, because the many of the processes which have been defined from the digital and physical. So who will be taking care of which process is something needs to be taken care of. So in terms of secured lending, if you see the digitization part of it is something which has been simplified or been at least come up to the some level. But this part which is manual and physical, which needs higher attention now, and that will definitely have a higher impact on the customer from the perspective of improvising on the secured loan processes. How do we see it from the perspective of how do we see the benchmarking perspective? So we do follow this Pulse framework, which is from the perspective of verifying, identifying the parameters which we need to evaluate, then user-centric analysis, mapping it to the life cycle of a particular loan, and then doing the strategic alignment and the expert experience optimization is something framework we follow. So would just like to go into the detailing of each step. How does it involve from the perspective of the parameterization? So first thing to identify the parameters, the first thing would be understanding the platforms, right? So you need to have understanding of what are the features that have been adopted in the platform, what are the current journeys, what are the online journeys, offline journeys which have been followed, which are all the system integrations that have been considered from the perspective of the current platform structures. So that is something which is from the say platform side or the customer interface side. The other part comes which is of the operations, like how are the current operations are, what are the processes are being followed, how is the underwriting being done, what is the loan life cycle management. Because at certain point of time you consider the loan life cycle up to certain level, but then it has been broken in between and no continuation of the journey been considered, or the operations been, or the operational process have been considered from there. So that is something which needs to be deeply checked into, and definitely the tech stack, because if you have API stack, how is your API stack, and what are the APIs that you are able to consume? Also, how is the possibility for the third party integrations, and what are the data governance layers you are following, or the cyber security layer which has been followed, and customer consent architecture, how that has been followed. These are the some of the factors which needs to be taken care as a part of technology stack. And definitely the compliance is one of the most important aspect which needs to be taken care of, which will be from the perspective of the say KYC, regulatory guidelines, lending guidelines, DLG guidelines, etc. From that perspective. So that will help to build this benchmarking parameters, which would be largely from the perspective of the process optimization, that what is current loan journey which has been done, what is current TAT for the each of the step of the journey, and also the stage-wise study and its impact on the overall journey. What which are all the stakeholders which are involved into, how is the automation level of processes have been considered, and what are the rate of customers are getting dropped off, and how they have been handled, what are the documents that have been asked for, as well as the efficiency, that what is the application approval rates, say credit scoring model rejections, top up cross sell rates, or portfolio growth, etc. needs to be taken care of. And operational costing from that perspective, what is the cost per loan process is there. I mean, initially, when Samir started, he mentioned about the cost as well, right? So, which is typically the higher cost. So, how do we justify that cost from the perspective of the current adoption of digital, or the prospected adoption of digitization perspective? Also, what is the cost for the lead generation, loan origination, collection? So we talked about the not considering the sales cost, right, which is again needs to be considered as a part of operational costing or the marketing costing, and the definitely the technology cost, and what are the possible revenue leakages which are there. So many of the times, the not having the accurate interest rate, or commercial negotiations have been not handled properly, lead to have the revenue leakages there, and collection opportunities needs to be tapped upon. So utilizing the data of the customer, what you have in a better way, will definitely help to do this. What are the fraud detection rate or portfolio segmentation, how that has been done, is something which is linked to the revenue leakages. So these are the simplistic, or you can say I can say the sample parameters which have been considered. But if you go deep into your process, you will be able to find out that there are a lot of dependencies which can be considered from each of these sections. From the perspective of the user-centric analysis or the journey mapping, assessing the current customer journey and user experience is very first way to do that. How to do that is to do interviews with the customer, ask them the right questions, look for the data points which they give as a feedback and accept it to work upon. Operational experiences, evaluate the backend processes which are there, how those have been optimized, are there any scope for the speed, increasing the speed, accuracy, or the automation perspective to minimize the dependency on the each individuals or the persons from that perspective. Technology enablement, even the customer engagement framework, market insights. So these are the a few of the parameters which needs to be considered as a part of user-centric analysis and the journey mapping. Considering the strategy alignment and the experiences, like you need to compile all these insights which you have got from the market, doing the own study and study of own processes. Based on the readiness of the institutions, these parameters will be help you to get these insights, as well as it will be able to give you the assessment report, which can be referred to identify or draw down the initiatives which you can pick up. So there you can consider which are to be picked up as a part of initial or the low hanging fruit first, and then which have to be picked up which has higher impact, but the efforts are also have a higher and the commercials are also higher. That needs to be take a strategic call. So doing the strategic alignment would be helpful from this initiatives which have been picked up. And ultimately, how does it will help that it will impact on the improvement of on the cost operation, the improvement on the cost, process optimization, better customer experience engagement, as well as new business opportunities will be opened up, and the revenue leakages will be identified. Typically, this this type of benchmarking is done with the key stakeholders of the institution. So that involves your technology team, credit team, product team, sales team, policy team, retail credit unit team, as well as the operations team. So there are multiple teams which gets involved into it and needs to be part of this discussions, as well as the overall the process of the benchmarking. Yeah, so typically we picked up as this example as one of the example where we draw down the customer journeys and how do we detail it out from the perspective of the each step, and doing the deep analysis of the each of the step, because that only helps you to come to the conclusive state and what would be the impact. So I would just here hand it over to Shashank for the next panel discussions here.
Yeah, thank you, Vikrant. I think we have gone through that one overview of the overall secured lending from Samir, and then continuing with Vikrant talking about the customer experience. I think Samir has aptly put it that apart from the TAT, I think also the customer